The Senate held a joint meeting of the Transportation Committee and the Judiciary and Public Safety Committee to hear testimony on the consequences of having driving privileges revoked. Joining me in the studio to reflect on the implications of what was learned is the chair of the Judiciary and Public Safety Finance and Policy Committee, Senator Warren Limmer. Welcome.
Hi.
Can you lay out the rationale for calling this particular meeting?
Why, sure. Recent headlines have begun to tell us that there might be an increase in people driving after their driver licenses have been revoked or canceled, and then getting into accidents that cause injury or death. And as we have begun to just read some of the headlines, we wanted to make sure that, is this a real indication or a rise in this type of behavior? Or is it the effectiveness of good reporting, and the reporters are telling more and more of these incidences, but is that really reflective of an increase in the state? And that's why we wanted to do that. But before we write specific legislation, I thought it was important to visit the whole concept of canceling, revoking, issuing driver licenses. What are the penalties? Why would one lose their driver license? And then if we are planning on changing some of the consequences for bad behavior, what do we have in law now? And do we need to rewrite all of a full chapter of law? Or can we be a little bit more specific, a little more surgical, and see if there's gaps in our existing law and write laws specifically to cover where our weaknesses are?
And most of these incidences involve driving under some kind of impairment, correct?
That's correct.
Speaking of impairment, a recent article in the Brainerd Dispatch referenced a study by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration that said that Minnesota has the highest rate of recidivism for impaired driving. So we're apparently the worst in the nation. Why do you think Minnesota has a problem?
You know, I don't know how to really answer that. The reason why I say that is that legislators don't always follow every statistic of a out-of-the-state expert organization that's giving facts, figures, and statistics. We have administrations that do that type of thing. They follow the curves, they follow the research, and then if they think we have a problem, they will certainly give us that indication. That's not to say that citizens can't bring us information as well. And we try to glean as much as we can also as a good legislator. We try to keep our ear to the ground as well. Why Minnesota is leading according to this one indicator, I don't really know. It may be a cultural idea. You know, the number one issue that faced us in the legislature that got the most phone calls was Sunday liquor sales.
That's true.
Is there a causal link here? I think there may be more of a cultural indication that Minnesotans like to drink. And as a result, some of them will make bad decisions once they are under the influence.
And then as a result of drinking and poor decisions, there's long been a debate over treatment versus punishment. Do the penalties for driving under the influence or operating under any kind of influence need to be increased, or do more affordable treatment options need to be available, or is it a mixture of both? Where do you fall?
We've probably gone as a state as a mixture of both, punishment and treatment. But for those who are chronic inebriants, there's very little penalty that will change their behavior. They definitely need a very concentrated treatment model. But to be effective, you have to have a person willing to accept the treatment, willing to change. And a lot of people just aren't. They may go through the treatment, but deep down in their heart, they've convinced themselves either they don't want to change or they don't need to change. They're still in denial. And they can go through a program, they can say everything that needs to be said to get their little release from the program and get back into society, but that doesn't necessarily change their heart in order to change their behavior.
Now, one of the ways Minnesota has sought to address this is through DWI Courts. I believe that there's 18 right now. To your knowledge, are these making an impact?
I think they are. We have a number of specialized courts in Minnesota. They specialize in understanding the defendants. Perhaps they're a veteran returning that suffers from
PTSD
or perhaps a person who's had some traumatic events in their life and their family, or other causes, or financial issues. The courts are tuned into that and see if they can help alleviate and take that problem away, or reduce that problem in that person's life as treatment is initiated. It gives that individual a little more hope that there is a path, a better path out of this problem that's now gotten extremely complicated and unsafe for those around him.
If someone has a suspended or revoked license, and yet they still have a job, responsibilities, a lack of transportation options if they live in a rural area, they will drive whether they have a license or not. The Department of Public Safety's Jody Oscarson testified before your committee, and she believes that increasing ignition interlock devices is a viable solution. What do you think?
I think ignition interlocks have proven themselves as being an effective tool. They're a minor cost. Oftentimes the defendant is paying for that install of that device in their car. During a driving episode, there may be a time when that person gets a signal that they have to pull over within maybe 3 minutes of them driving, to again blow into the machine to make sure that the person that initially blew into the machine to start the car is the one driving the car.
To prevent the fraud that could happen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think there's a lot of redundancies in that program that make it a very effective program for Minnesotans.
Now, you mentioned the cost of having the device put in. There's also the cost to reinstate your driver's license. There's also the additional cost to car insurance, court costs. Are some people driving without a license simply because they can't afford all of these costs?
We heard testimony today that one of the initial costs to get your driver license reinstated is a $680 fee. Now, maybe for most people that's manageable, but there are some people in a lower income bracket that have a problem with alcohol, and they have a problem with income. And if they can't generate that $680, they're going to drive anyway because they need their paycheck. Well, does the high fee now constitute the reverse of what behavior we want to create? We really want to create them, give people a reason to get treatment, become responsible, and be productive. And if we have such a high fee to just get into the first step to be considered for reapplication for a driver license, and it's so high that a good percentage of them can't do it, then we have to analyze. We have to determine, is this the right fee? And I think over time it's been determined that legislators in the past have used the dollar amount that originally started out many years ago at only $2.50.
I know, that's insane.
Now it's $680.
Right.
And so, now granted, that may be back in the 1920s, but nevertheless, the $680 fee goes not into any driver fund or a treatment fund. It goes into the state general fund. So they've used it as a cash cow to raise funds on people that don't have a constituency to protest it. That's what legislators commonly look for, is where can we find the source of money to raise without raising a lot of ire in our constituency. And they found one with drunk driving, and not too many people are too sympathetic to those individuals, so pour the fees on them. And in some cases, if they have a problem with drinking, they have a problem with family relations, they have a problem with their jobs, they have a problem all across the board.
It's affecting all aspects
and it's
of their
affecting.
life.
Once you put a heavy fine or fee on them, they can't get out of the hole.
Right. Senator Limmer, we've got to stop there, but it's always a pleasure to have you.
Thank you. My pleasure.